Broadcasting from Ireland, featuring interviews with some of the biggest names in magic. Welcome to the Deceive Reality Podcast with your hosts, David Peace and Steve Spade. Featuring interviews with some of the biggest names in magic.
Hey everyone.
Reality Podcast with your hosts,
Hey everyone.
and Steve Spade.
It seems like the video is still spinning somewhere. I don't know what's going on there.
Hey everyone.
There we go. It was playing somewhere
There you go.
as well, just for the fun of it. To be here with us again. We're joined today by Alain New. Alain, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Nice to
Thanks
be
for-
here in Ireland with you.
No problem. Thanks so much for joining us. So we're delighted to have you. We're back after a short break, but good to fly into it now. So we always start with the same question for everyone: is how did you get into magic? How did this whole magic and mentalism thing start for you?
Well, I've had a very rich background in magic and mentalism. In fact, it all started with first when I was around 7 years old. My parents were both library science people, and so they came to America from China and Vietnam, and they met in Laramie, Wyoming, and eventually I was born in San Francisco. Not too around the time that I was 7, we had moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and my father got a job at the Library of Congress, and my mother got a job at the National Library of Medicine, respectively. So of course, they wanted to have me become a reader. And so they had encouraged me to read by telling me that since my father worked in the largest library in the world, what would I like to learn? And if the world was at my access at that point, you know, for a 7-year-old, why wouldn't you want to learn magic? And so,
Yes.
so that's what I requested. And before I knew it, I had a stack of magic books, of which Walter B. Gibson's The Master Magicians was one of them. And that really, really did kind of inspire me, just because I realized that, you know, all of these superheroes that I had always gravitated towards as a child were kind of like these real life characters that were known for having these amazing powers. And each one of them seemed slightly different. And, you know, the romantic style of magicians back then, from Alexander, the original man who knows, to Chung Ling Soo, to, you know, the great Keller and Thurston and Houdini, all of those guys just sort of had like a different flavor to each one of them. And it made me realize, it kind of, you know, blew wide open the idea that magic could really incorporate not just one, but several different kinds of things, of which you could just choose and decide what you wanted to be. So later in life, you know, as I, you know, came into the Washington, D.C. area as a magician, I realized that I just happened to be lucky that D.C. happens to be like a hub for some of the world's greatest magicians to just sort of pass through. And I ended up meeting a lot of the guys, John Kennedy, who was at the time one of the most creative magicians in the world, just happened to be my first mentor as a sleight of hand mentor. And from there, his partner at the time, Mark Chervinsky, ran a magic store called Dream Wizards, which was not just any magic store. It actually, the front was Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games and stuff like that. And then the middle section was like a science fiction bookstore, essentially, with all kinds of science fiction and fantasy books, and then like art posters and stuff like that. And then at the very back of the store was where you found the magicians and the magic store. So it was a fun experience. I ended up becoming a demonstrator there, and then before I knew it, by the time I was 18, I had acquired enough of a local following, but then met Denny Haney, who became like my first, who I'll call my first business mentor, who basically taught me how to break into the business of being in show business and all of that. And that turned into a 10-year time with Denny. And just recently, Denny Haney's book came out, and it is just it is just like a photo album, like a family photo album for me of my past. And it's just amazing, just the life that I had to live with him before going into all this. In fact, Denny was interested in me becoming an illusionist. So you'll see photographs in the new Denny and Lee book of me, doing East Asian illusions like the aerial fishing and stuff like that. And so I was a big fan of that kind of stuff just from Denny's influence. But as I grew more practical by nature, I realized that the Chevy van that I was using to cart an entire show, including 4 assistants to and from various different gigs all across America, from Atlantic City to various different conventions, magic conventions we would perform in, but it was ridiculous. It was so much work. And eventually, because one of my loves had always been mentalism, and I'd been studying mentalism since I was actually being taught by John Kennedy, because Mark Chervinsky was a mentalist and a seance medium, and actually was a paranormal researcher. So I was kind of interested in both styles from the very beginning. And even while I was with Denny and Lee, I was constantly reading, Bascom Jones's Magic, and I was reading, all of the early mentalism books from 13 Steps and forward. So and just keeping track of everything. So by the time right around 1997 or so, I got approached by a local college promoter, and he got me into the college world as a mentalist. And then I realized that I could make as much money as I was making as an illusionist, but I wouldn't have to pay, a cast of 4 people, and I could just pack really small. And then I thought to myself, if I could just take that as a philosophy, if I could just kind of reduce everything that I know, because I've acquired a lot of knowledge by then, into just my carry-on luggage, then how cool would that be? I could perform anywhere in the world, and I wouldn't have to do anything except for carry on my luggage. And so after that, I became a full-fledged mentalist, and really based on a business decision more than anything, because I realized that what I liked doing more than anything was just amazing people and giving the people an experience of having seen something really amazing or something that they've never seen before. And you can do that by being an illusionist, but you could also do that by just having a real good arsenal of mentalism and impromptu ideas stored away in the back of your brain that you could just perform at any moment's notice. And then all you'd have to do is work on your own, presentation and your own style of how you would deliver that experience to people. And that's how it all happened.
I do think it reminds me of the story that illusionists want to be mentalists, and mentalists want to be comedians, so we can carry nothing and just show up to a gig with nothing on you and just tell a few jokes and make the same money and go home. Carrying luggage is what we all want to get away from, I think, is the goal through performing.
Absolutely. In fact, a recent TripAdvisor review, the guy said, just like seeing a comedy show, but mind blowing. And I love that because, for about the past 5 years now, I have actually been a co-host for a show out of Washington, D.C. called Hocus Jocus. And it's basically a comedy and magic type of show that started in Washington, D.C. And then when the pandemic rolled around, we turned it into a virtual show. And it has now attracted, various different comedians from all over the world. But I tune in and I do a little bit of magic from time to time. And, usually parts of my show get thrown in there. When I say magic, I mean, my own mentalism stuff. But yeah, so basically, they are, it's a place for me to try out new material. It's a place for me to hang out with my comedian friends and just sort of feel or glean whatever style they may have to offer me. Just because the thing that I find so interesting about comedy is that comedians don't ever try to be the same, whereas magicians are always working on the same material, right? So, I mean, it's so interesting. Like I had this one friend back in DC who had this great Stephen Hawking joke that she told right around the time that he had passed away. And And then like the week later, she didn't tell it. And I was like, I love that Stephen Hawking joke. What's up with that? And she's like, oh, well, I mean, he's been dead for like over a week now. So, and so I was just like, it's funny that they like to roll with their material. And I think that is really quite commendable, just as a magician, I'm really interested, or as a mentalist or as a performer, I'm just interested in how do I make myself feel like there's an endless well of content that's coming from me, because especially today in YouTube and television society, they just want you to keep doing something different. And back in the day when I grew up, Denny enforced on me this idea that I could just do the same thing for the rest of my life, and I can always work. But I find it really interesting that, especially in today's day and age, that has changed, and that people actually do want to see different content, and they want to see a kind of mastery of oneself that shows you that there's that you're just not like a one-trick pony.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's actually like, we had a question sent in from Sarah beforehand on any advice for staying fresh and having longevity. So I think that's an interesting thing, to stay fresh when really we're just reading minds. And how many ways can you do that before you run out?
Well, it's interesting. So right now I'm here in Las Vegas. I'm not really in Ireland, but but I feel like I'm in Ireland because I'm surrounded by Irish guys. But here in Las Vegas, where I am, um, I'm performing at the Alexis Park Resort Thursday through Sunday at a 7:30 show every night, and Thursday through Sunday. So tonight, in just a few hours, I get to head over there and I do a live show. And the live show there is held at 25 feet away from the audience. The audience is about 6 feet apart from one another. So very similar to like the way, at least most restaurants here in America work out. You can kind of come in, you come in masked, you sit down. Once you sit down, you have option as whether or not you want to take off your mask or not. One cocktail waitress will come around and serve you drinks throughout the show. So it's actually so in many ways, it's kind of safer than a lot of restaurants, just because there's less movement in the room. And, once you are at your seat, you can watch the show at 25 feet. But never once does anyone from the audience come up onto the stage, masked or not. And never once does anything from the stage get passed out into the audience. So it's a curiously challenging show, but one in which I've become pretty good at doing, and the show reviews are starting to come in and they're looking really good. So I feel really confident about the way things are going. With regards to what you were saying about staying fresh, like the thing that's most interesting about my show right now is that it's a show about the powers of the mind. It's a show about mentalism and having fun watching, kind of strange, mind-blowing demonstrations being done. But it's also a show that refers to the moment. I check in with the audience about, this 25-foot distance between us. It's curious, it's weird, and it makes them literally a part of history as we slowly, in a soft reopening, open up Las Vegas to continue being the entertainment hub that it is, as we deal with the pandemic as it is right now. So it's an interesting time, and it's an interesting way of being able to present the show, because it reflects upon the current time. So what I think is what I think would be a good advice for anybody out there, with regards to trying to not just state yourself as a performer, but as somebody who represents the public at large. You want to just think about what the needs are of the people around you, and think about what's happening in the world around you, and call attention to that, and maybe call attention to one or two demonstrations that might reflect upon how we can deal with that in a positive way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really interesting, because the 25 feet stuff is kind of like a James Randi's idea of how to stop a mentalist from being able to perform. It's like, you can't have anything written down, you can't take anything, you can't give anything. It's really restrictive. But the Zoom show is, I think, a good preparation for that. Then, did you find that they translated across?
It was actually because of the Zoom shows that I became really successful at doing corporate events and doing anything that I could over Zoom. Really, I did school events over Zoom for really little children, in fact, and I didn't change my material one bit. All I did was change the way I personally related to a younger crowd as opposed to an older crowd, and it actually worked really well. It was amazing how many of the kids really loved what I did and just loved the way that I was able to interact with them. I think that sincerity and authenticity comes across over the screen, and so when you are authentic as an individual, that's something that people can really relate to. And in many ways, the notion of my show itself was capitalizing off of the idea that despite the distance that's between us, because of what I do, I can prove to you that the connection that we have with one another is actually more profound than we can imagine. And so, with that idea being brought to them, my clients kind of thought to themselves, that's an interesting way of presenting what's going on. Let's give that a try. And when they would have me, it became it really went well, and it has actually, kept my clients calling me back. And these days I'm performing 4 nights a week, doing live shows plus doing Zoom shows during the day because I'm on Pacific time. Here in the United States, I can do an East Coast show as late as 8 o'clock p.m. and still go in time to get ready to go to work here in Vegas. So it's actually been, I feel very blessed. I know that there's a lot of performers out there who are not working, and all I can say is, I've worked hard to get to the place that I'm in, but at the same time, I feel like I've gotten really lucky, and I'm just super blessed to be able to have the current lifestyle that I now have here in Vegas, and I just moved here too from Maryland, so I mean, I'm literally about to go back to Maryland this coming Sunday and pack the rest of my things and put it into storage and then continue my life out here in Vegas.
Nice. I think it's a dream for all of us to get to Vegas at some point as like a space to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't believe it happened.
We had another question sent in about the socially distance shows, and have you learned anything that surprised you now that you're performing socially distanced? Is there anything that you didn't expect to be a challenge or maybe be easier than you thought?
Well, I've had lots of inspirations. So since April of 2020, I opened up sort of a dojo, if you would, a Zoom dojo of mentalists. I call it the Mystery Arts Dojo. And David, I know you joined us one night, and it's a fun night, isn't it? It's like, a lot of inspiration is being cultivated by us. It's not like just a hangout. It's really about it's a hangout, and it's actually very chill in that way. But but I'm really good at pushing my group to think about certain things and to think about things in certain ways, and we come up with the most amazing things. And I have to say, I've even last night we were doing the it's three nights a week, or three times a week for 3 hours each session, and currently it's free. I'm eventually going to kind of create a Patreon page that I think I'm going to open it up to a larger group of people. But currently, if you're a Facebook friend of mine, all you need to do is just tell me that you're interested in joining, and I pop you on. And if you're, and what I'm hoping for is that, as the moderator of the dojo, I'm hoping that you'll come back. And so the point is that if you don't come back, I start to filter my group. And, my feeling is that, if you're somebody who was just curious and you came in for a minute to watch, that's great. But if I don't see you come back over a few weeks, then eventually you get dropped off the list. But you can always come back. You can always say you want to come back, and I'm not dropping you off the list for any malicious reason. It's really just to keep the group constantly thinking, and a lot of the ideas that we bandy about are very, very deep, and and some of them are really not so deep, but they're it's kind of like how I like to think of, in the martial arts world, an instructor will oftentimes take their black belts through like an advanced white belt training. And so the idea is you take like a simple idea that, maybe like the magician's force or something like that. And you just kind of ask them to extrapolate on that concept. And it becomes a really, really interesting exercise because suddenly you realize there are things about it that you didn't think about before. And last night we were talking about PK and telekinesis, and that was like probably one of the coolest. In many ways, I look at these sessions and I go, wow, these are like workshops, but they're actually just free sessions that we're doing. And so it's amazing that that the information that comes out is oftentimes really deep and super powerful and worth taking notes on. And at one point, we actually did take really good notes, but ever since I've come here to Las Vegas, I've become not so good at taking good notes. But I'm hoping, but to this day, like even yesterday, I came up with an idea that was actually it was before the dojo started. I came up with an idea that is actually so interesting and so well. It's actually based on something much older, but it's actually interesting that nobody ever caught on to it. And what I'm hoping to do is kind of bring it out to the world of doing readings and creating like a really interesting analytical reading. So ideas is just, you want to stay creative, you want to stay on top of how you perform for people and keep them engaged at doing something. Oftentimes ideas can be overly processed, and so I try to keep them as simple as possible. And yeah, that's basically my formula for trying to maintain myself in this world.
What I really like with the Mystery Art Dojo as well is everybody being involved of like different styles and different skill levels as well. That it really shows because sometimes someone who's just starting mentalism might come up with an idea that the rest of us are so ingrained in the mentalism that we wouldn't even think of, because we've all read the same books while this person's coming in fresh, and they can bring a new idea that nobody's ever thought to come up with, which I thought was a really good. And there's a real good community feel as well, which I thought was great. So I'm looking forward to the next one. Definitely looking forward to that. And when you set up that, is it going as you expected? Is it going better than you thought with the dojo?
The dojo maintains itself. It's amazing how, I mean, it always goes. It's funny because I always think to myself, are we ever going to run out of ideas? We never run out of ideas, and even when I can feel like there's a little bit of a lull in the ideas that we're generating. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just go back to, like I said, like the white belt stage. Like I'll just go back to like, something simple, like, and I'll just say, what do you think of the patio force? And I'll think, and then usually ideas just start to come forth. And from something simple, one of the things that we were talking about the last time that I thought was really interesting was just conceptually this idea that if you understand the terrain of where you are to such a degree that you know everything about the terrain, you are at such a distinct advantage over your audience. And so just from a conceptual standpoint, just having some knowledge of something that is so far beyond what they would think that you would know about that thing, for you to bring them into that world and then to be able to offer that world to them in a way that shows just your mastery over what you're presenting to them is just it's fun. Like right now in my show, I talk a lot about numerology in my show, and I'm basically doing sort of math tricks for them, but I talk about it from a numerological standpoint, and it's been lots of fun, and it really kind of turns the show into this kind of mystical show without it necessarily getting too foofy, if you get my drift.
Yeah.
It's I really try to ride that fence of trying to keep people on this idea that magic is possible, or the impossible is possible, and the things that we imagine can become reality. And then at the same time, I try to understand the skeptical side of it, and I try to, I realize that there are people in the audience who might not be jiving completely with what I'm talking about. And so I use that opportunity for comedy, and I use that opportunity to have fun with them. And it's actually a really fun, very loose, very chill type of show. But at the same time, I've got some great fun things that are just, I'm really excited about doing, things that, and there are things that I came up with just because I wanted to somehow meet the impact of my live shows. And so I was using my live shows as a measuring stick as to, like, can I make this 25-foot distance work for me? Can I make this show as good as the shows that I was doing before the pandemic? And the answer is yes. The answer is you just need to work, and you just need to, readjust and think about it. And it takes, one thing that I say to other performers is, if you're interested in doing things on Zoom or the teleconferencing platform on any level, expect to do about a dozen shows without being completely happy with them. Just go ahead and expect that it's not going to be perfect, for the first dozen shows. And if you do a great show on the first one, then bam, you're lucky, and that's great, and you can keep going forward. But know that a dozen shows later, you're going to be at a level that you didn't even think you were at the very beginning. And so you want to plan, in my opinion, for those dozen shows. You might want to even say, the first dozen shows that I do, I'm going to give it to you for free, and then just work on doing a dozen free shows for your friends and your loyal client base. And then once you're done with that dozen shows, you will have the experience level that you will need, because I can't tell you exactly where you need to improve upon your work or whatever, but after a dozen, I'm pretty sure you will know what you are doing at that point. And that's how many it took for me to do it here in Vegas too. And it was weird, because I thought I could take it, coming out here to Vegas after doing Zoom shows, because I'm thinking, well, Zoom shows, you're like in Ireland and I'm in Vegas, and so I mean the time difference is already like completely different, So, but the difference doing a show live at 25 feet is the audience doesn't see you this close up, first of all. Yeah. Secondly, there are no boom mics in my audience. And so when they speak at a normal speaking voice, I got to either listen really clear with them, or I've got to make a joke about it. Like, I'm the man who knows, but at this distance, I'm not always the man who hears, So, I mean, there are these moments in my show that I have to just contend with the challenging conditions that I'm in. And that takes another dozen shows. So, I mean, as soon as I got to Vegas, I thought I was prepared by having done all these Zoom shows. And I realized that now I'm in this new situation. Now I've got to think about it in a different way again. And so it's interesting. It's really, as a performer, I see myself as a survivor. And as a guy that's over 50 years old, I can say that it's kind of impressive to me that I actually kept it going to past 50. So I feel happy to be the messenger that you as performers can actually continue your lives into retirement potentially.
I think it works well that, like, when you come up with a challenge like the 25 feet, and calling it out, I think, is a big thing for people, that you don't just pretend that there isn't 25 feet. And you could even the show to make it that, like, if we're doing scientific experiments, can I read your mind from 25 feet away without touching you and stuff? You could actually make the whole show like a science experiment as a theme and go from like that. Like, there's plenty of opportunities out there to be creative and get your shows to work with the restrictions, and then you can become more creative from there.
Yeah, exactly. That is kind of what the way I present it to them is, I share with them at one point, like closer towards the end of the show, I have like a number of like kind of experiments at 25 feet that I share with them. And they're more kind of suggestion based type of things, or more hypnotic type of demonstrations, but it's very, very cool to be able to give them that, you know, near the end of the show before the grand finale, where they get to kind of all feel the reality of how profound that connection actually is.
Yeah, definitely. And having gone into the mentalism stuff, you said you did a bit of illusion and sleight of hand and stuff like that. Do you ever miss performing other styles of magic that you maybe like, oh, will I slip an illusion into my new show or anything like that?
I do. And yes, I have. And it never works. I try, and I'll like make excuses. Like my manager, who also used to manage the great Kreskin, the amazing Kreskin, would tell me that Kreskin would do that, and he would say, back when I first started, I was really interested in magic, and and then he would do a kind of magic type of thing for the audience. For some reason, it never works. Like I've tried it a number of times, and I can pretend like it works, but I never feel good about it in the end. And so in the end, I actually don't do that in my show anymore. Though there are some people out there who might have seen me perform my show here in Vegas and saw me try. And in the end, I can say that as of right now, there's no actual magic in my show that doesn't lend itself to some powers of the mind concept. Spoon bending would probably be the closest thing to a magic trick, or telekinesis or something like that. But one thing that I have embraced here in Las Vegas is that nobody else really focuses on telekinesis, and so I've really I've decided that I would attack that subject matter, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it. So it's been going really well. It's not an easy subject matter to attack. Like it's easy to do a trick in which you cause something to move or you make a spoon bend or whatever, but to explain it in such a way that people goes, wow, that's pretty deep. That's basically where you want to get to when it comes to doing any type of mentalism or anything like that, is to, you're giving them the experience of, what I like to say is I'm giving people the experience of what a lot of people, have had in real life. But I'm giving you that experience. I'm not necessarily giving you the real life thing that's taking place, right? So what I have to do in order to give them the theatrical experience, while at the same time giving them, a little hint of knowledge that maybe it's not, that it's not, that what I'm doing is actually a theatrical representation of what we're talking about. What I have to do is I have to give them something more. I have to give them a piece of wisdom or a piece of knowledge that actually makes them go, okay, I can see how that could actually work. And the piece of knowledge that I give them shouldn't be bullshit, excuse my French, but it shouldn't be like, it shouldn't.
We don't.
You can't like lie to them. You have to give them something that is actually genuine, and it irritates me whenever I feel like a mentalist is doing what they do to the degree that they can't explain themselves more than by just lying to the audience about what they're doing. And it's annoying to me. I feel like there are actually intelligent ways of being able to explain what you're doing and how you're doing it without like leading your audience completely astray and making, and ultimately seeing them as stupid people.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
Whether you lie.
What type of magic do you do, Steve?
Sorry, my audio has been a bit bad throughout. I've caught most of it, but I didn't want to interrupt you while you were talking. So I'm primarily an escape artist, but I do magic as well, and I do bits of mentalism and bits and pieces in my show. But I'm mainly an escape artist.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting because, mentalism and escape artistry are very similar in the sense that we are literally giving people theatrical demonstrations of things that, may have happened in real life. And then we're putting ourselves under stringent conditions that make it that are examinable to the audience's perception, to the degree that what is happening is actually real as opposed to an illusion, and that and we have to convey the reality of what we're doing as opposed to telling people that that this is all fake or whatever.
Exactly, and you're always trying to make them kind of like care about what you're doing and try to draw them in that way.
Right, exactly. It's a different vibe, and it's something that is, and it requires, again, like we were talking about, just that feeling that they need to trust you as a performer as much as you need to trust them to make sure that you're safe and that you come out of this okay. So it's really that's really cool.
Yeah,
definitely.
People do show up thinking they want to see the escape go wrong, but if they did, they wouldn't be too happy about it. That's what they fool themselves into thinking that they want to see it all go wrong and the person get crushed or whatever, but really they want to see the success story at the end.
Exactly. And it's so funny. So like for me as a mentalist, I do have a certain level of, things could potentially go wrong in my show. And there's always that possibility that somebody just doesn't want to work with you properly. And then things just kind of, screw up. And so, it's fun for me in those types of conditions for me to just poke fun at the audience as soon as, because one of the things that I always say in my show is I say, in my show, whenever you see me fuck up, it's always the audience's fault. So it's like my little joke that I say to them, but in the end, it's like, you go, give me a letter give me a letter from the alphabet. What letter do you think is in this word? And they say X, and it's like, oh, so you really wanted this to fuck up, right? And so it's like, and, you can poke fun. In my opinion, like I use all opportunities in which I get hecklers or when I get people that just don't want to, be a part of the mystery that I'm creating. I use those moments like a comedian to like just mess with my audience and to just poke fun at them and stuff, just because this, to me, it's about entertainment. So what I'm giving you is entertainment. Therefore, if you're trying to mess with the entertainment, then the entertainment messes with you.
It's like that. Give me a number between 1 and 6, and they look at you for a second and go 7. And you're like, no, between 1 and 6.
Right. Right. It's you run into that all the time. And here in Vegas, you have the most extreme of the extremes of people. Like you have like one of the things that I do a couple of math things in my in my show near the very beginning, and right after I do the first thing, I say I work it into my show where I say, now I know some of you in the audience right now many of you who've been drinking since 10 a.m. are probably wondering if we're going to continue doing these math things. And I'm happy to inform you, no, we're done with the math things as of right now. And so it's like, and it's so funny because you can see almost the panic in their eyes where they're like, what have I gotten myself into? I've been drinking since 10 a.m. And so
Definitely. I find sometimes even when a mess up can become part of your show as well, because you find that it actually works better. So I do the hook trick in the mouth with strings, and I used to bring out a first aid kit before I put the hook in my mouth. And one time I forgot, and after they pulled the first string, I then went and silently took out the first aid kit and put it out, and I got a huge laugh. And that's how I do it at all times. I wait until the first string has been pulled, and then I bring out the first aid kit, because it feels like you're thinking more, but it was completely happened by accident. But now it's how the routine goes.
Yep. That's that's what I say, 12 shows. Usually by that point, you've like gone through all your different experiences and you've added all the extra little nuances, and you realize what it takes to get the audience going at certain points, and you can start to compose how you want your audience, how to excite your audience ultimately,
Definitely. And speaking of things messing up, those are things. We have a segment called The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, where we ask someone to tell a story about performance that might have started off good, went bad, or even ugly at the end. So what performance story jumps to mind when you hear about
that? It was a couple of years ago. It was actually the year that the Washington Wizards basketball team was facing the Boston Celtics. And I was doing a show about a week before that show, and I was performing for a number of like important people, of whom in the audience was Jean Marie Fernandez, who's the wife of Raul Fernandez, who owns the Washington Wizards and the Washington Mystics and a lot of the sports teams in Washington, D.C. And so after my show, and also Brett Baer, the news anchor from Fox News for the White House correspondent, and his wife Amy were there. And it's funny, Amy has a tendency to always ask just pointed questions to me, and it's usually right after my show, and usually, and I'm really good at like taking questions after my show because I'm good at explaining what I do without necessarily blowing the effect of what I'm doing for people. So Amy says to me after the show, so who's going to win between the Wizards and the Celtics? And that question sucks before the show, before the game, because especially because the owners of the Wizards were there. And so now suddenly, everybody is listening to me and everybody wants to know who's going to win between the Celtics and the Wizards. And so I'd been doing this already a few times earlier in the year, in which I had heard this word from these friends of mine, Bob John and Brenda Dunn, who were the founders of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory in Princeton, New Jersey. They had actually entered themselves in a football pool, and they used their random event generators to predict who would win between the football teams. And their event generators actually made them win the entire football pool. And so they were telling me about this. And so it occurred to me that random event generators are basically just really, really, really advanced coin flipping devices. So I thought to myself, if that's all they really are, then a coin flip might actually predict all kinds of things. So based on the random event generators of their stories, I just started spinning a coin on the table. And so I have this nice silver, piece dollar that I usually use. And so I, when they asked me the question, Wizards or Celtics, I said, okay, so we'll call Boston heads, Washington tails, just because of the alphabetical correlation. And so then I said, okay, so Boston's heads, Washington's tails. I'll spin the coin. I spin the coin, and it goes straight to heads, right? And so at that point, also the owner of Goldman Sachs, the president of Goldman Sachs was there, this guy John Rogers, and he goes, spin it again, right? And so nobody wanted to see it go to heads, and so I spun it again, and it went to heads again, right? And so it was just like, it was a situation where I just did this great show for them, and then Amy Baer asked me who's going to win, and then I get to tell them that we're going to lose. And so it sucks to be put in that situation, and I didn't know what to do at that point at first, because, I was hoping something would happen that would just kind of lead to some kind of an outcome that would make me look good. And so after that, everybody was super disappointed that Washington was going to lose. And that at least my coins were saying that. And so thinking quickly on my feet, I basically said to her something that I continue to now say to people who ask me these types of questions. And I basically said to her, I actually turned to Jean Marie and said, there's two different ways that we can watch reality unfold. And the first way is to just see it unfold before ourselves and observe. And when we observe, you can receive all kinds of information. And that's one way that we oftentimes do it, is just through our own observation of the senses. But the other way to watch reality unfold is to stick your hand in there and to put your own conscious intention into what you want to have happen. And by putting your own conscious intention into it, and by telling them, for instance, in this particular case, that the odds are against you right now. So you can just watch it happen, or you can tell your team that they need to work extra hard, that their odds are actually against them. And if they actually work extra hard, they will actually beat the odds, based on the fact that they knew in advance that the odds were against them. And that is another way of being able to look at reality, is to change it by what you have energetically as a human being to change reality. And at that point, Jean Marie Fernandez looked at me and said, I like that answer. So at that point, I said, so make sure you tell the Wizards, but I don't think she did. because the next week, Boston actually won and the Wizards lost. And though my prediction was accurate, it was bittersweet. And but I will say this: I do feel very strongly about what I said, and I feel so strongly about what I said that I use it to this day when I talk about how we can project onto the future, and it actually it resonates hard with people, and they get it when I explain that to them, because in the end it makes total sense, right?
Yeah. And all the Wizard players got traded right after that game because Alain knew said they didn't try hard enough, and that's why they lost. So they were all traded right away. That's brilliant. It is those panic moments when someone asks you to predict something when they've got stakes in it, and you're like, I don't know what to do here.
So let me tell you. So the last time, I performed for Brett Baer's 50th birthday party just a couple of months ago. And of course, his wife is there, and it's a lovely, lovely event. And again, their friends Raul and Jean Marie Fernandez are there, and again, a lot of those same people are in the audience. And it was around late October when I actually performed for them. So of course, right after the show, Amy Baer says, "So who's going to win the election?" And I'm just like, I hate that, because, first of all, Brett Baer is like a Fox News White House correspondent. So, I mean, we're already talking about, that a number of those guys are probably at the very least centrist Republicans. And so, I mean, in many ways, I knew that Biden was going to win, but it's so hard to say stuff like that to people who are already conservative people. And so I'm just trying to make a living. It's not like these answers mean that much to me that I want to lose my job, or have some strange, awkward perception cast on me by the people who just saw me. And so, when she asks questions like that, it's kind of like puts you in a really awkward position. And so she asked me who's going to win. And so I resort to one of my other favorite statements that I say to people. And I've been saying this for a long time, and I really, truly stand by this one too. I said, I've made a promise to myself that I'm not going to tell anyone who's going to win the election, even though I personally kind of know who is. So all I can say to all of you right now is that my philosophy on how to know who's going to win anything is to just check in with your own natural knowing, and just know that oftentimes, and more often than not, the most psychic answer is always going to be the most obvious answer within you. So that being said, if you just think about what the most obvious answer is, it's probably going to be that. And then at that point, somebody in the audience went, "Yeah, I've always thought that." And then they stopped badgering me about it. So I felt good.
I once had someone ask me it was a pre-Christmas party, and they asked me, "Is my boyfriend going to propose at Christmas?" I was just like, 1 sec, I'll write something down. So I wrote down on a business card, "You know the answer. You're just looking for outside validation," or something along those lines.
There you go, right?
And I performed for him like 2 or 3 years later, and he didn't propose, but he proposed a year later. And she said that, "You were so right. I knew that he was going to wait a year, but how did you know that I knew that?" It's like,
That's
oh.
awesome. That's awesome. Yeah,
Another good
exactly. If you leave the idea open, so I mean, like for instance, as a going into the mechanics of mentalism and stuff like that, you know, when people approach you and they say, "Okay, what am I thinking?" You know, again, that idea of the most obvious answer is the most psychic answer is something that you can actually use at that moment. And by just being sincere with them and maybe thinking about what you were just talking about just a moment before, and maybe just creating, just gathering some kind of clue as to what they might think of, what they might be thinking about right now. Oftentimes when they ask you, "What am I thinking about?" they don't even know what they're thinking about. So so you can actually tell them in that moment what recently you just that they were thinking about, and it'll usually be correct. And so oftentimes when they ask you what they're thinking, so long as you're deductive enough to understand, what you were just talking about and how that might relate to what they're thinking about, you can actually just give them, again, the obvious answer. And most oftentimes the most obvious answer is the most psychic answer. So it's something that I've used, and the thing is that if it doesn't work, it's like a challenge. I mean, they could have been thinking of anything. There's no way that you'd be able to, if they say no, it's penguins, you'd be like, "Okay, well, I'm wearing black and white." So,
A good way to get out of a 50-50 as well is do something like, if you have a pendulum, get them to show them the straight line and circle a pendulum, and in their mind, don't tell you because you don't want to influence them, assign one of the two values to the line and the other one to the circle, and then just watch the pendulum, and then be like, "I don't want to know because I don't want the match spoiled for me. But you now know who's going to win." And just leave it like that. So it's like, "I don't want to know, but now you know, 'cause the pendulum told you, and we're done, and I'm out of here." Thanks.
right.
Okay.
Very cool.
But yeah, we're just coming up there near the end, so we just like to thank you, Alain, for coming on. And if do you have anything you'd like to promote where people can find you online and things like that?
Oh yeah, you can like my Facebook page at Alain New, the man who knows. You can find me at Alain. That's ALAIN underscore new NU on Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, feel free to follow me on IG. I need more followers. DM me on Instagram. I'm very good at responding to my DMs, as I did, I think, for you, David. So,
Yeah.
uh, and uh, and yeah, so yeah, feel free to stay in touch. I'm giving lectures also to local magic clubs. So if you're interested in a lecture, please feel free to hit me up. I have here a number of books, but the ones that you can get on Amazon are these two. State of Mind, which is kind of it's got kind of beginner mentalism effects to start things off, but it's really kind of a life story of how I do what I do. So in many ways, if any of you are interested in how a professional mentalist that does this for a living, slings it out into the public and does it in a way that is what I think of as a genuine and authentic way of being able to present oneself. There's a 325-page book that kind of begins with simple mentalism effects, talks about all the research that I've done throughout my life and where I go with regards to, mysterious happenings and stuff like that. And then it ends with a bunch of consciousness demonstrations and ways of being able to think about manifestation and other things. So it's a book that kind of shares with you my philosophies from the standpoint of how you would see me as a mentalist or even as a layperson from an audience that just saw me and perform. Picture Your ESP is also a test your intuition type of book that shares with you, how do I do this, various different photographs. There's lots of photographic type of images in there. It kind of takes you through a guided meditation to think of something, and then you turn the page and hopefully you get it right. My prediction is that if you actually go through the 30 challenges, you'll actually find that you have above average level of intuition that is actually common to what most people actually have. So besides that, if you're a mentalist or a magician and you're interested in my work of any of my manuscripts, I have downloadable copies of all of my old manuscripts at a pretty good price. Just feel free to hit me up by email or by Facebook or by social media, and I'll be happy to talk to you more about what I've got.
Definitely, highly recommend it.
Awesome.
Thanks again so much. And if you want to find out, I'm at David Peace Magic, at Steve Spade, and at Deceive Reality, and deceivereality.com, Ireland's newest magic shop. So if you want to get any magic supplies, go there. So again, thanks everyone. We'll be back again next week, and we'll talk to you all